Okay. Hi, so I'm Susan Brodar. I'm a teacher. I teach all ages, ranges from 2 to 80, obviously with different methods. And I'd like to explain to you the benefits of full immersion right from the start. So what's the best way to learn a language? Well, there are many methods and theories, but let's look at a way we can learn our native language. A baby is born without being programmed for any particular language, and it spends the first year of its life sleeping and listening. Gradually it listens more and it sleeps less, and finally it starts trying to repeat the sounds it hears. So after about a year and 7 months, a baby can usually say its first sentence. Now a baby doesn't study grammar, all it does is listen. Around the age of 3, it has acquired sufficient vocabulary and sentence structure to speak correctly in the language of its family. So, in fact, if a parent speaks a different language to the baby, the child will learn both languages and will speak to each parent in their own language. I speak from experience because I myself grew up bilingual, and my children have been speaking Italian to their father since birth and English to me. So this is something you can experiment. Babies don't study any formal grammar, but they study vocabulary and expressions by association. So they associate a sound, a word with an object, and they learn the language directly by listening. And they pick up vocabulary and grammatical structures in context. Babies only learn in context by associating images, objects, situations, and people with the language they hear. And this is the reason it's fundamental to speak to your students in English from the first day you meet them. The more they listen to you speaking, the more they'll pick up and memorize, even subconsciously. Now, I've experimented this on myself. I've been teaching myself Spanish mainly by listening to audios and traveling. And last week I texted a friend that my daughter had won a gold medal, and I first wrote ganado, but it just didn't sound right. So I then opted for conseguido, which sounded correct, and a moment later I was congratulated for her having conseguido, so won this medal. Now, I'd never studied this verb before, and I had somehow absorbed it, so listening gives you a kind of feel to the language. Let me get to the next slide. Okay, so as a result, the best way to learn a foreign language is first and foremost by listening, in order to associate an object or a picture with the word, an expression in context. The brain has to connect the word or the expression with its meaning without translating. And now this association is very easy to the brain, whilst translating makes it work twice as hard, because the brain already has its image bank, and so all it needs to do is to associate various synonyms, which could be in various languages, to it. Instead, translating is like putting the words of languages into separate drawers. The brain has to open 2 drawers, find the puzzle pieces in each language, and then put them together. And sometimes it picks the wrong pieces, and horrific translations result. Look what happened here. So there was a clothing company which probably consulted the dictionary without the help of an expert. It says made in Turkey, but the translation in Spanish became made in the bird you roast for Christmas instead of the nation. Even worse is when someone confused the Latin American Spanish word for Pope with potato, and the Pope was greeted with welcome potato. Then I was on holiday recently in Spain and copied off the back of a toilet the Spanish and English translation of why we should throw the toilet paper in a separate bin rather than in the toilet, avoiding it to get jammed. So they wrote the jam is imminent, Obviously, a toilet can get jammed, but a jam can't be imminent. So ironically, you have to know a language to use a dictionary correctly. I always speak English with my students directly from the start, which means I adapt my language to their level. And if they are complete beginners, I'll speak very slowly and clearly, using very simple language with gestures and pictures. This makes both teaching and learning really hard at the beginning, but if students understand that they need to be patient and persist, they'll reap the benefits. Now, this is no easy feat. A few years ago, I had an evening course of complete beginners, including 2 retired couples. I only spoke English and we slowly progressed. They seemed to be really unhappy that I insisted on speaking only English to them. Halfway through the course, the 2 elderly couples left on a 3-week cruise, missing quite a few lessons. On their return, though, they told me they had been the only ones of their group to communicate in rudimentary English on their holiday, and what had surprised them most was that they were able to understand. So they completed the course with a renewed attitude, and I was quite satisfied. So when I teach beginner adults in a class, my very first lesson deals with getting to know each other, and we discuss in very simple sentences who they are, where they live, what their jobs and hobbies are, their families, and then towards the end of the lesson, I write a paragraph on the board which acts as a scaffold for their oral introduction to the rest of the class. One by one, the students speak, reading the sentences and filling in the gaps appropriately according to their personal situation. And then they leave the lesson feeling it was difficult and tiring, but at least they had managed to already speak about themselves in English, and which I presume was satisfying. So one should always try to end a lesson on a high note to make students feel satisfied despite their difficulties. When I teach speaking only English to my students, I aim at teaching them specific language and expressions, but I inevitably use daily language that I hadn't intended teaching formally. As a consequence, I find my younger students, in particular, using expressions I hadn't planned, such as I have an itch, it's itchy, you've got a terrible cough, bless you, when they sneeze, oopsie daisy, a typical British expression for when something falls down accidentally. Really? When they tell me something interesting, even if they speak to me in their mother tongue, I always reply in English. And then, depending on their age and proficiency, I allow myself to understand them in their own language or insist they express themselves in English. So children and adults pick up the language you don't realize you're using. The same goes for texting. When I text with my students in English, I sometimes use expressions they don't know. So they'll text me back asking, what does "I'll let you know" mean? Or what is ASAP? So my students are picking up language they wouldn't necessarily learn in class, but only in daily life. Picking up the language in context gives you expressions, phrasal verbs, without having to memorize them and think. They just come naturally. My sister-in-law came to my evening classes after a long day's work, and she always asked if she could only sit and listen because she couldn't concentrate anymore. She wasn't particularly talented nor motivated, nor did she study at home. Despite this, she told me that on one of her holidays with her friends who spoke no English, she managed to solve various problems at the hotel. The words just came out and she had no idea how. And this is an example of the power of the brain to absorb language. But not only language, also people are associated with language. My school students are so used to associating me with English that if they meet me outside the classroom context, in the corridor, at the supermarket, they'll still speak to me in English. It's just natural for them. They don't even dream of speaking to me in their native language. When you learn a language, you should associate, yes, when you learn a language, you should associate an expression or a word with an object or a situation. You learn these association in chunks. By doing so, you don't necessarily learn the grammar in the formal sense, because you pick it up and embed it in your brain just as it stands. And over time, you'll pick up these pieces and put them together like a puzzle and just form correct sentences. And that's why it's important to surround yourself with the language. Set your computer, your mobile phone, and social network settings into the language you're learning. Read, listen, and watch as much as you can. Immerse yourself fully in the language if you can't travel there. Okay. Well, I'll just show you the last slide, which summarizes everything. So full immersion enables you to absorb language naturally, learn vocabulary and grammatical structures in context, and so you can think directly in the language and understand people better.